Welcome to Beyond My Crisis. I'm your co-host, Ron Rossnick.
And I'm Vivian Gaspar, and right now we need to examine what parents should do when they think their child or teenager is having a mental health crisis. What does it look like, and how to handle the situation ongoing. Today we have with us here Dr. Stacey Plichta, who's a public health professor at CUNY College. Welcome to our show, Dr. Plichta. Thank you very much for joining us and educating our viewers on a subject that I think is very infrequently dealt with in the forum that we're in right now.
Thank you for having me here.
We would like to cover what is something that a parent should look at that constitutes, first of all, a mental health crisis. What does that look like?
Well, first, let me say that mental health issues are becoming more and more prevalent among teens. About 20% of teenagers meet the standard for clinical depression. About 20 to 25% have anxiety disorders. 10% engage in self-harm activities such as cutting themselves. Over 500,000 teens a year have suicidal thoughts, serious thoughts of committing suicide, and 5,000 teens a year actually succeed.
Is this a nationwide statistic?
This is a nationwide statistic.
So for a parent, what are the indicators that I'm a parent? What do I start having to look for?
There are lots of things you can look for. The most obvious ones are if your child is talking about not wanting to be here anymore or wanting to kill themselves, take that seriously. If they're talking about wanting to hurt other people, there are a lot of other things that can happen that constitute a mental health crisis that aren't so as obvious. But the main thing is to use your parental instincts. You know, if you come across your child and they're crying uncontrollably and they're hysterical and they're talking about that they're no good and they're a bad person, you know, don't write that off as teen drama.
Okay, so engage in a conversation with them, but we as parents are not going to fall into that drama. We're here to kind of guide them through it and have an understanding.
And the understanding is that it's not drama, that it's important to take it seriously. There are lots of other things you can look for. If your teen seems to have delusions, if they think there's someone out to get them, if they're talking very quickly with forced speech, if they seem to be falling apart, and there's many forms this could take. The main thing is, as a parent, if you're looking at your teenager and you think, I'm not comfortable leaving the room right now because my teen might hurt themselves or someone else, or I'm not comfortable leaving my child alone, you may be in the midst of a mental health crisis.
And at that moment, what are the best actions to take?
The best actions are to get help. So one of the things every parent can do is know in advance of any crisis where the help can come from. So in New Jersey, for example, and this is true for every state, every county has a specific hospital designated that will do mental health screening for adolescents. Every county has something called a family support organization. You can typically find these online through the state's Department of Health that will list organizations that have resources that you can learn about in advance. So the first thing is knowing where to go. So once you know that, if you think they're having a crisis, you can do one of two things. If you feel that you can safely transport them to an adolescent psychiatric emergency department, you should do so.
How is this any different depending on the age of your child, or is it any different?
It's not really any different. Mental health problems can strike at any age. They may manifest themselves differently in younger children versus older children. If you don't feel there's an immediate danger to the child or that you have to get the child help right that second, you can make an appointment, hopefully for the next day, with the child's pediatrician. But again, if you have any doubt at all, if you're feeling uneasy that your child may be hurt or really hurting and that you can't let this go, take them to get screened.
Right. There's a stigma behind mental health practitioners. How do we counterbalance that?
The first thing is to, and it's true, the stigma is there and it's terrible because it's a huge barrier for people getting help.
Okay, so let's break the barrier.
Sure.
What
so
do we
the
do to
first
break
thing to do is to talk about it, is to be willing to broach the subject with your child gently, to talk about it with other people. So If, for example, you feel your teen's in a crisis situation and you take them to the adolescent psychiatric department, talk to a trusted friend about it, because you're going to need someone to talk to as well.
So when you say trusted, so I think one of the important things for you and your teen or your adolescent is that there's trust, there's confidentiality. So what do you do to establish confidentiality?
Well, with a friend or a family member, you pick someone that you feel that way with to begin with. But what may surprise people is as you start talking to others about what your family's going through, you'll find a lot of your friends and family have gone through similar things with their children, but they never talked about it because of the stigma, because of the shame.
Right. And a lot of kids might be on medication like fluoxetine, which is Prozac, an antidepressant, or Depakote, or Lamictal.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm not an advocate for pharmacological products. There's a lot of people that just want to go holistic. What's your scope on that?
My scope on that is it depends. If your child is having a psychiatric emergency in which you're afraid they're going to be immediately hurt, a mindfulness program might not be enough. You know, I would trust professionals. Take your child to the psychiatric emergency department. Let them get screened. Follow the advice of the professionals.
Right.
Children don't have to be on medication forever, but if being on medication for a few months is going to allow your child to become stable and return to wholeness and then maybe transition to a more holistic way, the medication's worth it.
So
If they
So right, for a short time they could take the medication and they'll possibly be off of that.
And possibly not. It's important to recognize that mental health problems are just the same as any other physical health problem. They're biological problems based on a chemical imbalance in the brain.
But we can't diagnose the chemical though.
Well, we don't know how to do that, but so let's say you do
Actually,
end
yeah,
up
but-
taking your child, teenager perhaps, to a mental health facility because you feel that you just don't feel safe leaving them alone, as you mentioned. And let's say they do require or highly recommend a stay. What does a stay look like? What's the length of time? Do they give options, or does it become mandatory?
Let me talk about this. This is a really great
What is that
question.
called, by the way? A stay is called officially?
A stay is called an inpatient stay at a behavioral health unit.
Embacturated or something like
Oh,
that?
is there an acronym for that?
No, I don't believe I know
Yeah,
so.
okay.
But essentially, when you go to the psychiatric emergency room, what will happen first is your child will get a physical health screen, because sometimes physical health problems like very low blood sugar can masquerade as a mental health crisis. So they'll be checked out physically to make sure there's not something physical. They'll also do an alcohol and drug screen. After they're medically cleared, they'll be transferred over to a psychiatric screen, which is typically a psychiatric social worker. The social worker will make the determination whether or not your child needs to have a short inpatient stay at a behavioral health facility, which is what we now call psychiatric hospitals. It's usually mandatory at that point. You know, if a health professional is saying to you, your child is at a risk of hurting themselves or others and needs care, you may not be able to refuse that care. And you don't want to. You don't want to take a child that professionals are saying to you they need care and not get them that care.
What happens if you don't have insurance? Is there a way they would deny you to have that inpatient time for your child?
They can't. Basically,
For emergency room visits.
For emergency room visits, but they cannot release a child if they cannot discharge them safely. So what will happen is typically the hospital, if you don't have insurance, will work with you to get something through the Children's Health Insurance Program, which is in all 50 states, through Medicaid if you qualify. There are a number of programs to help pay for children's stays, and the hospitals will work with you. But once you go in for care and it's determined that your child needs inpatient care, they cannot refuse to get you to a facility. They're not legally allowed to discharge you if they can't do it safely.
Is there some other tips that you could provide parents that once they put them into a stay, I don't know, how long is it typically?
So typically it's a 4 to 7 day stay for a short-term inpatient behavioral health stay. And the first thing I want to say is it's probably one of the best things that could happen. which sounds
Embrace it, you're saying.
embrace it, which
Right.
sounds
It feels like
unusual.
your family's in crisis when they're
Right.
there, but instead of really feeling in crisis, saying you're mitigating the crisis at that moment.
Because that is the first step towards getting your child the help they need. A lot of times, parents don't realize that their children have a mental health problem until it manifests in a critical way. But once it manifests, that's the starting point for getting help. A lot of people have visions of mental health hospitals as something from one flew out of the cuckoo's nest, with shambling in the
They
halls.
closed a lot of those down.
They're not like that. The adolescent units are really nice units.
Colorful straitjackets, you're saying.
No,
Hopefully no straitjackets.
actually, some children describe them as kind of a really boring summer camp,
Mhm.
if you want to think
Oh.
about the worst part of it.
Okay.
So what will happen is your child will be taken typically by ambulance, and you won't be allowed to take them yourself for safety reasons, from the emergency room to the inpatient place.
Okay.
You'll typically be allowed to go with them and sit with them through admissions to the inpatient behavioral health unit. Once they're admitted, though, you're not allowed to go in with them. And that's the most heart-wrenching moment for parents, watching your child walk through those
Right.
doors.
So what tips do you have for parents to help their kids at that moment and help themselves and help their family that's at home, kind of what's going on, and the uncle is saying, you know, when I was a kid, you ever do that? We just give them a beating somewhere.
Well, all right, so let me take this in pieces. To help your child, first of all, every one of these places, what will happen is the child will go in. Within 24 hours, they're assessed by a psychiatrist. If they need medication, they'll be given medication. They're on an inpatient stay, so if they have a bad reaction to the medication, they're at a hospital. It's the best possible place to do this.
And that's what you say to your family and your relatives.
And that's what you say to them. They'll be in group therapy every day. They'll be in individual therapy. What you can do to help your child is several things. Every one of these places will allow you to drop off clothing and a hairbrush and sometimes personal hygiene. It's important to take the strings out of all the clothing for safety. They'll make you do that, so just know that in advance.
Because there could be other patients there that really could be in
Right.
worse shape than your child.
Absolutely. There
So
could
you
be-
have to be considerate about the whole group that
so
is
you,
there.
So you can't give your child anything that they might hurt another child or themselves with.
Like shoelaces.
Right, like no shoelaces, but bring them their own clothing so they can be comfortable in their own clothing. Bring them some flip-flops or some or slippers or shoes without laces. Sometimes you'll be allowed to bring paperback books, no hardcover books. Every one of these places is visitation. The best thing you can do for your child is show up to every single visitation
Okay.
point.
So be involved and be there.
And
What
your
about
child-
food? What if they
Okay.
don't like the food they have there?
Well, some places will allow you to bring food for your child when you visit. They have to eat it during the visit, and you take the leftovers with you, and do that. Some places won't. Now, you may go to visit your child, and your child may be in a place where they refuse to see you, which is their right. Don't be discouraged. Keep showing up. Your child needs to know that you love them and you're there for them, even when your child is turning away. It's really important to show up, to be there, to participate in the care. But when you're at a visit, keep it light.
Keep it light. So
it's
don't
not your
blame.
therapy time.
Don't give them any blame for anything that's
Oh my
happened.
gosh,
right?
no.
Don't put them down. Don't.
No.
Be positive.
Be
Or
really
complain about the
positive.
situation like, oh my God, I'll make this thing work so I can see you, or anything negative like
Yeah.
that.
Tell them that you're glad they're in a place where they're going to get help, that you will do everything in your power to help them get help after they leave, that you're sorry that they're in this place, but that this is the chance for things to get better, and that you're glad to be there with them. Make it really clear that you're supporting them through this. And like you said, say nothing negative, but also keep it light.
But we can't
at the visit.
sugarcoat the whole thing. I mean, they're going to have to do some hard, deep work
Absolutely.
in themselves to get transformed.
But it's not going to happen in those 4 to 7 days.
Right.
So that's just the
That's
beginning.
stabilizing.
And that's the thing to understand.
Well, what does happen afterwards? I mean, what can you help our audience understand that after that short stay of 4 to 7 days, what's next? Does this go on indefinitely? Is it for a minimum of several months? The ongoing
There's
therapy,
no-
what happens?
All right, so there's no answer because every child is different and there's a wide range of mental health issues. But what generally happens is your child will be in an inpatient facility for 4 to 7 days. You, at that time, that's your time that you have when you know your child's safe, for you to work really hard to think about what do you want to discharge. Discharge planning isn't always so great at these places. They're great at getting your kid stable, but you have to think about what's next. one of the great options, there's lots of great options. One of the things you can do is have your child transition to a partial hospitalization program for a few weeks.
So it's an outpatient visits a few times a week.
Well, and it's more than that. An intensive outpatient program is, instead of going to school every day, your child goes from, let's say, 9 to 5 or 9 to 4, goes to a therapy center. And there they'll get group therapy, they'll get individual therapy, they'll start doing their schoolwork. That center will be in touch with your child's school. They'll send schoolwork. Those centers all have tutors and teachers that come in to work with the kids. And your child may need to be there for a few weeks.
And the state pays for this because it's part of, No Child Left Behind education?
The state does not pay for the intensive outpatient programs. Those you have to explore ways of paying with the hospital and with the program.
Okay.
It depends on your insurance. If you don't have insurance, depending on your income level, there are state programs. This is where parents need to do their homework. The next step after that, so your child may need to be there anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids after that, remember, your child's mental health crisis didn't just happen. It was a long time coming. And you may have not seen it, but you know about it now. And so now is the time to move forward.
Can you just give us a couple of signals that people should just watch out for? Because so many people are caught up in their survival, the day-to-day. Let's go to work, drop the kids off, do the homework,
Right.
cooking.
And what do we check? Should we have all access to their cell phones, have the passwords?
Facebook accounts, perhaps.
It's good to monitor
their
your
wrists.
child's electronic usage, but that's, other places have covered that. What you want to watch for in your child is emotional things. Is your child withdrawing from usual activities? Do they seem sad all the time? Are they sleeping a lot? Are they not sleeping enough? Do they seem really anxious? Are they withdrawing from friends? Do you suspect that they're engaging in self-harm? Do you suspect that they're thinking about killing themselves? And it's important to talk to your child about it. Really hard to do calmly, but important to do it non-judgmentally. And to say to your child, hey, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And then stop talking and listen. Because a lot of times as parents, I think we want to talk and talk and talk.
So the key is listen. Don't lecture, but listen.
Don't lecture, but listen. And if your child says they've thought about it, get help. That may not mean you have to run to the adolescent psychiatric emergency room. You may be able to prevent things getting that far.
Right.
But if still get them help. You can go through your pediatrician. Every county has a family service organization. Go on their website, call them up, ask where you can find resources for your
And
child.
a lot of kids don't want to talk about it. They said, there's nothing I really have to say about it.
Yeah, what do you do if they just blow it off?
They don't want to communicate with you.
Questions,
Yeah.
right.
You do a couple of things. It depends. Again, this is where you have to use your gut as a parent. There's no absolute checklist I can give you. You keep the lines of communication open. If you think something's really wrong, take them to a counselor and leave the room. A lot of times your child may be relieved they have someone to talk to, but they're not going to say it in front of you. They may not want to say what's going on in front of mom or dad. They might be embarrassed. They might feel awkward. So get them to a professional and then go sit outside and let them talk to that professional alone. And then the professional will never tell you what your child said because they're not allowed to.
And we as parents, we don't need to
And
know everything. It's not about us.
Exactly.
It's about their success.
But the professional will tell you what you need to do for your child. So they may not say, oh, your child said X. Now they will tell you if your child is threatening to hurt themselves or someone else. And
That's
they'll tell the kid, they'll tell you.
mandated reporting.
It's mandated reporting. Well, actually, mandated reporting is a little different. Mandated reporting is not about telling parents. It's about telling an authority.
But that has to be reported.
It has to be reported,
Yeah,
but
if
they will
say
tell
that.
you.
So what's mandated reporting? It's for what?
Mandated reporting is a generic term for a lot of things. So, for example, for physical and sexual abuse of children, if a child discloses to a teacher, a police officer, even a Girl Scout leader, a healthcare professional, a mental health care professional, that they've been physically or sexually abused, that professional is mandated to report the abuse to the authorities.
To the police.
To the police or to Children and Family Services.
DCP&P is called now.
Yeah, they're obligated to report it to some authority. And who exactly they're obligated to report to varies by state and varies by
Right, so
national.
you enumerated one mandated reporting. What's another mandated reporting?
If there's a serious concern that the child is going to hurt themselves or somebody else, they can mandate that the child go to an adolescent psychiatric emergency room, get further screening, and the child can be involuntarily committed for a few days to do further screening and to find out what's going on.
And I've got to say, there's a very large percentage of the population that owns, as you know, one of the parents own a handgun or a rifle.
No.
And you find the situation starting to emerge in any level whatsoever with your child. Should you just take a precaution of removing your guns from your home and maybe giving it to a friend to hold on to?
Well,
They're already locked.
well, hopefully.
Hopefully, but even if they're not,
well,
kids are smart,
So first
especially
of all,
teenagers.
if you have weapons in your house, they should be secured where your children can't get them. They
Yeah,
should
they have
be
these
unloaded.
fingerprint locks. You
Well,
don't-
not everybody has.
A
If they
key and a
have a
common.
lock.
So
No.
there are a lot of ways to secure your weapons. If you don't think that's enough, if you even think that there's a danger to your child, remove them. Sometimes if your child is thinking about cutting themselves or hurting themselves, lock up all your knives. It might be inconvenient to have to go to your locked room and get a knife every time you want to cut
Or
a vegetable.
scissors even, right?
Or scissors.
But
You know,
it seems impractical. How can you lock every sharp object away? They could find, they could sharpen a stick outside in the backyard if they wanted to do harm.
It's not as impractical as it sounds. You do the
Okay.
best you can.
Okay.
You know, if you're at the point where you think your child is going to harm yourself, you should be talking to a professional.
Yes.
You know, not
Okay.
just guessing what you should be hiding on your
Sure.
own.
Oh, of
The
course.
professional will say to you, you know, your child's talking about killing themselves with medication. You may have to, it's inconvenient, of course it is. You
when
may
do
have to lock up your
so
medications.
very important thing.
Yeah.
When do you need to assert yourself above what a professional is saying, where you don't feel right? The professionals you don't feel is doing all the right things. How do you steer this or drive this ship?
You do it, well, you educate yourself,
Mhm.
and there are wonderful websites. The National Institute of Mental Health has a good one. Most state health departments have one. You educate yourself before you go in. You figure out what you want for your child. You talk to the professional about it. If you think the professional is really wrong, you go to another professional.
I know, but sometimes I'm concerned, or someone is concerned that they may say the wrong thing. It's just like mandated reporting. You say the wrong thing, even as a joke, they may take this out of proportion.
That usually doesn't happen with
It doesn't,
professionals.
okay.
You know, especially children's mental health professionals are there to help your child. But of course, you have to be the ultimate decider. What can really be helpful, and I can't say this enough, is getting support for yourself and your family, because it's not just your child that
What does that mean?
has
So
a
there's
brain.
support groups,
There are
perhaps?
support groups. It means, and
Like
going.
join a meetup group?
There's not meetup groups. Again, there are these things in New Jersey. They're called family support organizations. Every state has them. Just about every county. Find the family support organization for your county.
Yeah, there's one called FACE, right?
There's
for
one
fathers.
called. There's
Oh.
one called FACE. There's one called. I'm blanking.
I know
on
through
it.
Jewish Family Services, they have
Right,
some.
Jewish Family
so-
Services have some. In Morris and Sussex County, there's a group called Caring Partners that can put you in the right direction. Find the family support groups. They have meetings every week, every other week. They usually have someone you can email or even someone you can call. Get in touch with other families who are going through the same thing. Find out what they're doing. Go to those meetings. And I know that everyone's busy. You know, we're working. We're now trying to take care of a mentally ill kid. We're
But we could do a
doing
search on
respiratory-
Google and find
Right. We can-
results.
Yeah, we can talk to someone on the phone.
And you know what? Sometimes this prioritization trumps being too busy, because God
Absolutely.
forbid you don't want the alternative. What happens if you decide your busy schedule, which of course is a real thing.
Yeah.
We're not making up that you don't have to do all the things to work and
Right.
take care of your household. But if you don't pay the proper amount of attention to this crisis and how to live beyond it, because people think the crisis is the immediate need for the psychiatric care. But right now, we have to project out what's getting beyond that immediate crisis to mitigate it.
And this could be a year or years of work. And sometimes a parent will lose their opportunity to earn income. They've got to be okay with
Yeah.
less income, improved family.
And that's the main thing is, you know, when your child's in crisis, your focus is on the child. Not to blame the child at all, but to help the child. And to keep in mind that someone having a mental illness is no different than someone having diabetes. And we wouldn't blame our child if they had diabetes. You know, we shouldn't blame our child if they have a mental illness. The object is to get them the help they need.
Right.
So to quickly reiterate, you know, if there's an intense crisis, your child may spend a short amount of time in a inpatient hospitalization. That will get them stable. That's just the beginning. They may transfer from there to a intensive outpatient hospitalization for a few weeks. That will help get them ready to get back to school, ready to function in their day-to-day life. When they go back to school, this is really critical. You have to tell the school. If your child has an individualized education plan,
An IEP.
an IEP, you're going to want that modified. You're going to want to
Yes.
figure out what your kid needs and put it in there. If your child does not, you have to request in writing that your school's child study team meet to evaluate your child and provide them with what they need. Now,
Right.
none of this will cost you any money because that the schools are legally...
Even homeschooling if it's necessary.
Yeah, even homeschooling, your local public school is legally obligated to provide you with the services your child needs to get the education they're entitled to. After they come out of intensive in outpatient hospitalization, they may be in an after-school program for several weeks where they're back in school and then they're going 2 to 4 times a week after school to therapy to further work on their issue. And then after that, they may transition to where they're meeting with the therapist once a week.
Now, where you said it's 3 to 4 times a week, does that mean the parent then drives them to a meeting several times a week, or do they have a pickup service? How would that work?
Every place is different. Many of the places that offer after-school therapeutic programs will pick your child up from school.
Wow, that's even better.
Yeah.
Less stress for the parents.
Yes, so your child will be picked up from school, but you will have to pick your child up. Most of these places do not offer a service where at 5:30 they drive your child home.
But at least it's half the battle, so it's
Right.
helpful to parents who are working.
Right, so you're working, you know, your child is taken from school to the after-school program, you pick them up from the after-school program, and then you come home. Now, in addition to the child having therapy, most of these programs have a family therapy component as well, and you want to participate in that.
Now, Dr. Plichta, this has been extremely important information. This is why we wanted to give you our undivided attention for our entire episode, because this is life-changing, not just for the child, the teenager in crisis and living beyond that crisis, but it does encompass the whole family. So to make sure the parents become that child's advocate in school, outside of school, in their psychiatric care, and of course, to be communicating with the siblings of appropriate age and what's going on with that child in question.
Yeah, it's all about responding. We as parents have
Yes.
to be responsible. The ability to respond is our key.
It's about responding, and remember, you don't have to respond alone. There's a lot of support in the community for parents going through this, and many more people than you think are struggling with
Yeah.
helping a child that has a mental health issue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's
Yeah.
been fantastic
Yeah.
information, and I know there's many, many people who now know what to do. God forbid this happens to their family.